Dr. Daniel Thompson was the kind of man people respected and admired in the quiet town of Crestwood. At 42, he had built a successful practice as a renowned cardiologist, known for his compassion and dedication to his patients. With a loving wife, 2 children, and a charming suburban home, his life seemed perfect to those on the outside. But what they didn't see was the darkness lurking beneath the surface, a dangerous obsession that would lead to a shocking and brutal crime. It all began when Amelia Clark walked into his office one fateful autumn morning. She was strikingly beautiful, with long auburn hair and a captivating smile that could light up a room. But it wasn't just her beauty that caught Daniel's eye. It was the sadness behind her eyes, the way she spoke of her struggles with anxiety and loneliness. Amelia, a 29-year-old aspiring artist, had recently moved to Crestwood after a difficult breakup. Seeking a fresh start, she had hoped the small town would bring her peace. Instead, she found herself battling panic attacks and an overwhelming sense of isolation. Their first meeting was strictly professional. Daniel listened attentively, offering words of comfort and prescribing a mild sedative to help with her anxiety. But as their sessions continued, something shifted. Their conversations grew longer, more personal. Daniel found himself drawn to her vulnerability, her need for connection, mirroring his own unspoken desire for something more than the routine of his life. It wasn't long before their professional relationship turned into something much more dangerous. A subtle touch of the hand during a consultation, lingering eye contact, signs of an affair that soon became impossible to resist. They began meeting secretly at a small, secluded bed and breakfast on the outskirts of town. What started as innocent lunches evolved into passionate encounters, each rendezvous pushing the boundaries of risk and morality. Daniel knew he was playing with fire. His wife, Laura, was a devoted partner, completely unaware of her husband's betrayal, and yet he couldn't stop. The thrill of the affair consumed him, clouding his judgment. Amelia, too, was caught in the whirlwind of their forbidden romance. She was lonely, vulnerable, and Daniel's attention made her feel alive again. She was falling in love, and so was he, or at least that's what he told himself. But as the weeks passed, the intensity of their affair began to take a darker turn. Amelia, who had initially been content with their secret meetings, started to demand more of Daniel's time. She wanted him to leave his wife, to be with her so openly. She would call him late at night, crying and begging, her desperation growing with each passing day. Daniel, torn between his duty to his family and his lust for Amelia, found himself trapped in a web of lies and deceit. The pressure mounted, and Daniel became increasingly paranoid. He was constantly looking over his shoulder, fearing that someone would find out. He knew that if Laura discovered the affair, it would destroy his life and career. But what he didn't realize was that Amelia's obsession was spiraling out of control. She began to show up at his house unannounced, leaving notes on his car and sending threatening messages to his wife from anonymous numbers. Daniel's once orderly life was crumbling, and he was desperate to find a way out. In a moment of panic, he tried to break things off with Amelia. He told her they couldn't see each other anymore, that it was over, but she wouldn't hear it. Tears streaming down her face, she threatened to expose everything, to tell his wife, his colleagues, even the media. Daniel was horrified. He had no idea how far Amelia would go to keep him in her life. Just when he thought things couldn't get worse, Amelia revealed a chilling secret. She was pregnant. Daniel was in shock. His mind raced with questions and fears. Was it even his child? Was she telling the truth? Or was this just another manipulation to keep him tied to her? He was cornered, and Amelia knew it. She had him exactly where she wanted, and there was no escape. The stakes had never been higher. Daniel knew he had to make a choice, one that would change his life forever. Little did he know, the path he was about to take would lead to a horrific end that no one in Crestwood could have ever imagined. Daniel's world was unraveling. Every aspect of his life, meticulously built over decades, was now teetering on the brink of collapse. He couldn't sleep, couldn't focus at work. The thought of Amelia's pregnancy gnawed at him like a relentless parasite. He knew he had to do something. But what? Divorce Laura? That would ruin his family. Accept the child? That would expose his affair and destroy his reputation. Amelia had pushed him into a corner, and he felt utterly helpless. One cold December evening, Daniel found himself sitting alone in his office, staring blankly at his phone. He'd ignored a dozen calls from Amelia, each more frantic than the last. Her messages were a chaotic blend of love and hate, alternating between declarations of undying devotion and threats of exposing him if he didn't call her back. His heart pounded as he scrolled through them, his hands trembling. That's when he decided he had to see her one last time. He needed to talk sense into her to make her understand the severity of the situation. Maybe he could convince her to leave town, to start fresh somewhere else. He had some money saved up. He could give her enough to take care of herself and the baby, anything to get her out of his life. They met at their usual spot, a small cabin tucked away in the woods, far from prying eyes. Amelia was already there, pacing back and forth, her face flushed with anger and tears. The moment Daniel walked in, she rushed to him, clutching his shirt, her eyes wild. "You're avoiding me, Daniel. You can't just pretend I don't exist," she screamed, her voice cracking. "I'm not avoiding you, Amelia. He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "I'm just trying to figure things out. This is complicated." "Complicated?" She spat, her eyes narrowing. "You think I wanted this? You think I planned to fall in love with a married man, to get pregnant? You promised me you'd be there for me. You said you loved me." Daniel felt a pang of guilt. He had said those things, caught up in the heat of their passion, never thinking it would come to this. I know, but things have changed. I have a family, a career. If this comes out, it'll ruin everything. What about me, Daniel? What about our baby?" Her voice softened, her eyes pleading. "I want to help you, Amelia. I do. I've thought about it a lot, and I have some money saved. I can give it to you. You can start a new life. Away from here, away from me," he said, his voice shaking. Amelia's face twisted with rage. "You think you can just buy me off? That's what this is to you? Some mistake you can pay to go away? No, it's not like that. Get out!" she screamed, shoving him hard. "I never want to see you again." Daniel stumbled back, shocked by her fury, but then she broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. He reached out, his hand hovering over her shoulder, unsure of what to do. Amelia looked up, her eyes red and swollen, a terrifying calm settling over her features. "You know what, Daniel?" she whispered, her voice hollow. "Maybe you're right. Maybe it's better if I'm just gone." A chill ran down his spine. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm done. I'll leave, I'll disappear, but you'll have to live with this for the rest of your life, knowing that you drove me away, that you're responsible for whatever happens next." She looked at him with such a haunting emptiness that Daniel felt his heart stop. "Amelia, please, don't do anything rash. Let's talk about this." But she didn't listen. She grabbed her coat and stormed out, leaving Daniel standing there, his mind reeling. He felt a sense of dread, a feeling that something terrible was about to happen. He tried calling her, but she didn't pick up. He sent her messages, begging her to come back, to talk, but there was no response. For days, Daniel heard nothing. He went through the motions of his life like a ghost, his mind fixated on what she might be planning. Then one night, just as he was about to leave his office, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Amelia. "If you don't come now, it's over. I'm ending this tonight." His heart raced. He jumped into his car and sped to the cabin. The drive felt like an eternity, his thoughts spiraling into a dark abyss. What if she hurt herself? What if she hurt the baby? He couldn't let that happen, not because he loved her, but because he couldn't live with the guilt. He reached the cabin and burst through the door. It was dark, and the silence was suffocating. "Amelia?" he called out, his voice shaking. There was no answer. He fumbled for the light switch, his fingers trembling. When the lights flickered on, he saw her. Amelia was lying on the floor, her face pale, her eyes closed. Next to her, an empty bottle of pills. Daniel's heart stopped. No, no, no. He dropped to his knees, shaking her, his mind screaming in panic. Amelia, wake up. Please, wake up. He grabbed his phone, his hands slick with sweat, and dialed 911. His voice was frantic as he gave them the address, his mind a blur of fear and confusion. He felt for her pulse, his fingers trembling, and then he felt it, a faint, weak beat. She was alive, barely. The paramedics arrived within minutes, rushing her to the hospital. Daniel followed, his heart in his throat, the weight of what had happened crushing him. What had he done? What was he going to do now? He prayed she would survive, not for love, but for the hope that maybe, just maybe, he could fix this terrible mess. But deep down, he knew there was no fixing this. The damage was done, and there would be consequences. He had no idea just how devastating those consequences would be. Amelia survived the overdose, but everything changed after that night. She was admitted to the psychiatric ward for observation, and Daniel's life spiraled further out of control. He couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Every day he feared she would wake up and tell everyone about their affair, about the child she claimed was his. He knew he was on borrowed time. His wife, Laura, sensed something was wrong. Daniel had become distant, barely speaking, avoiding eye contact. She tried to reach out, but he brushed her off, claiming stress from work. It wasn't long before whispers began circulating in Crestwood. A nurse at the hospital recognized Amelia and mentioned her to a colleague who happened to be friends with Laura. Soon, Laura was hearing rumors about Daniel and a mysterious woman at the clinic. Laura confronted him one evening, her eyes filled with pain and confusion. "Daniel, I heard something today about you and some woman. Is it true? Are you having an affair?" Daniel froze, his mind racing. He considered denying it, but the guilt and fear were too much. "Laura, I made a mistake," he stammered. "But it's over, I swear, it's over." Tears filled her eyes as she took a step back. "A mistake? You call betraying your family a mistake?" Before Daniel could respond, his phone rang. It was the hospital. Amelia had regained consciousness and was asking for him. He left the house in a hurry, leaving Laura shattered and alone. He didn't know what he was going to say to Amelia, but he knew he had to convince her to keep quiet, to disappear for good. When he arrived at the hospital, he found Amelia sitting in her bed, pale and fragile, but there was a new resolve in her eyes, a coldness that sent a chill down his spine. "You came," she said softly, her voice devoid of emotion. "I didn't think you would." "Amelia, I'm so sorry for everything," Daniel began, his voice trembling. "But we can't do this anymore. It's too dangerous. You need to leave, to start over somewhere new. I'll help you. I'll give you whatever you need. Just please, let this go." Amelia stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she nodded slowly. "You want me gone, Daniel? Fine, I'll leave, but you have to do something for me first." Daniel's heart sank. "What do you want?" "I want you to tell your wife the truth, all of it. I want her to know who you really are. And then I want you to give me $1 million. It's the least you can do for ruining my life." Daniel felt a wave of nausea. $1 million? He didn't have that kind of money. And even if he did, there was no way he could get it without Laura finding out. "I can't, Amelia. I don't have that much." "Then you'd better figure it out," she said coldly. "Because if you don't, I'll go to her myself. I'll tell everyone." Panic gripped him. He was trapped. There was no way out. "Please, Amelia, don't do this." "Why not?" she hissed. "You don't care about me. You never did. You used me. And now you want to throw me away like trash. Well, I'm not trash, Daniel. I'm not going to let you ruin my life and get away with it." With that, she turned away, refusing to look at him. Daniel stood there, helpless and broken, before finally leaving the room. He knew then that there was no way out. Amelia would destroy him, and there was nothing he could do to stop her. But he was wrong. There was something he could do, something he had never imagined himself capable of. Desperate and out of options, he found himself contemplating the unthinkable. If Amelia was gone, truly gone, his life could go back to normal. He could fix things with Laura, rebuild his career, and no one would ever have to know. The thought horrified him, but it wouldn't go away. It gnawed at him night and day until he couldn't stand it anymore. He started planning, meticulously going over every detail in his mind. He would have to make it look like an accident, something that no one would question. One stormy night, a week after their conversation, Daniel drove to the hospital. He was a trembling mess, his heart pounding as he snuck into Amelia's room. She was asleep, her breathing slow and steady. His hands shook as he pulled a syringe from his pocket, filled with a lethal dose of a sedative he'd taken from the clinic. His mind screamed at him to stop, but he couldn't. He was too far gone. He approached the bed, his vision blurring with tears. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." He reached out, his hand hovering over her arm, but at the last moment, Amelia's eyes snapped open, and she looked at him wide awake. She had known he would come. "Daniel," she said, her voice calm, almost gentle, "you don't have to do this." But he did. With a sob, he plunged the syringe into her arm, pressing down on the plunger. Amelia gasped, her body convulsing before she fell back, her eyes staring sightlessly at the ceiling. Daniel stumbled back, his heart racing, his hands covered in sweat. It was done. He had done it. He fled the hospital, his mind numb, his body shaking uncontrollably. He drove home in a daze, not caring if he crashed. When he finally walked through the door, he found Laura waiting for him, her eyes red from crying. "I know everything, Daniel," she said quietly, holding up a printed email, Amelia's final message, sent to Laura before she died, detailing their entire affair and Daniel's plan to kill her. "I know what you did." Daniel's world shattered. He fell to his knees, sobbing, as Laura called the police. They arrived minutes later, and Daniel didn't resist. He knew it was over. Everything was over. As they led him away, he glanced back at his wife one last time. Her face was a mask of grief and betrayal, and he knew he would never be able to undo what he had done. His life, his family, his career, it was all gone. And for what? A dangerous affair that had cost him everything. In the end, Daniel Thompson was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of Amelia Clark. The town of Crestwood would never forget the tragedy that unfolded, the shocking fall of a respected doctor driven to madness by his own desires. And Daniel, once a man of healing, was left to rot in a cell, haunted by the memory of the woman he had killed and the life he had destroyed.